Good morning, everyone. I would like to first request Dr. Satish Kumar to open the session.
Hello. I hope I am visible. Good morning, everybody. First of all, a very, very warm welcome and to all the distinguished panelists who have kindly consented to join us for this launch of the report, and also to the attendees who are here to participate in this event. So I'm just going to take maybe 5 minutes to provide a little bit of context before I hand it over to the panelists and to my team members, Shyamshish and others who have worked hard on producing this report. So Shyamshish, maybe you can go to the, let me see if I have the next slide. Okay, yeah, so okay, all right. I have a presentation open here on my screen also, so I'm getting a little confused. Okay, so just a little bit about AEEE, Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. AEEE, in short, is a policy advocacy as well as a market enabling organization. We work through a triple sector approach, what we call, and where we work closely with the government organizations, the private sector players, as well as the other civil society and research entities to both, I think, create knowledge, work on maybe policy inputs, also in terms of the execution of the project, and that's where I think our approach to work with the private sector becomes very, very important. And I'm very happy to see, I think, that we have people from the private sector who are part of the distinguished panel here. So this is reflected, I think, in the e-mobility work that we do, but also some of the other work where AEEE works extensively, for instance, in the cooling and refrigeration space, also in terms of the work that we do on building the project that we are working on, Solar Decathlon India, where we are working very closely with the developer community. And so there, I think that's a common theme that sort of runs across our work, something that I would like to highlight to this audience as well. Next slide, Shyamshish. So coming to, I think, the topic for today's event, of course, this is a part of a series of reports and the research that AEEE team has been doing for almost last, I would say, last 24 months now. And the reports that you see on the screen. So I think we started this exercise, this project, as I said, 24 months ago. The first report, a report on charging of urban fleets, was published in June 2019. And then there was a gap. And then over the last 3-4 months, I think we have been coming out with these reports. So the May 2020, we came out with the report on electric four-wheeler charging. Then July 2020, we had a report on the EV tariff throughout India. I think what states have come out with EV tariff, what are the ranges that we see in India, and what are some of the drivers. And then 4th September, we came out with a report on electric 2- and 3-wheeler charging. And then October 2020, which is today, I think we are doing this report on the vehicle grid integration. So the theme that I think we have been working on, and which you will hear from Shyamshish and others also, has been that we feel that electric vehicle charging is the backbone for creating a robust ecosystem. And that's something where I think it's not just I think the standards, but it also, I think, the access to technology, also the impact on the grid that some of these charging solutions will have. So that's kind of the sandbox where AEEE, I think, has been working on. And today's work, which is like looking at the interface of how the electric vehicles and the grid are going to interact, and whether it could be done in a monodirectional manner or it could be done in a bidirectional manner. Those are, I think, what are the pros and cons. Those are some of the things that you are going to listen in today's presentation. So next slide, Shyamashish. So this is just, I think, to set the context. This is how is the VGI technology, I think, globally, I think across, if we look at it, how that is going to move forward. This is a slide that is coming from Navigant, and which is now, I think, the Guidehouse publication. I think their name has recently been changed. But this is something, and what I think is important to know is that the role of electric vehicles and what role they will play, I think, in interacting with the grid is just starting. There are quite a few pilot projects that are, I think, in execution mode around the world. And while it's a tiny market, I think, with about like $30 million in 2017. But the important thing is that it is going to grow like to about 20-fold of that in, I think, by 2026. And how that is going to play out, I think, in different geographies also is also shown in the different shades that you see in the bar charts. And I think the last thing is that I think EV, I think, penetration in India is just starting. All of us are aware about that. And I think it is important to start to look at, even though I think its impact is small, but it is expected that it could become a pretty significant end load, I think, in the not too distant future, maybe I think 10 years from now. So it would be important to start to look at, I think, some of the things that is going to shape, I think, both, I think, the charging infrastructure side of things, as well as, I think, what kind of tariff, what kind of policies, what kind of business models, I think, DISCOMs will also have, what kind of ancillary services, I think, it can come up, I think, which will start to take into account the penetration of AV as well. So that is sort of like the takeaway. What is, I think, it's important to study the technical and economic aspects, and I think the regulatory reforms, or I think the actions that may be taken to implement some of these services in the Indian context. So next slide. So I think before I hand it over to Ruchir from SHakti Foundation, we will do one live polling. And the question is that what does the vehicle grid integration involve? And you will see, I think, some of the options that are there. So maybe I think we can get to that screen. So the options that are there is passive management only, and that will influence the charging behavior in an organic manner. The second is the unidirectional active control of charging only. The second is vehicle to grid power flow only, or like it's all of the above. We will wait for about maybe like 8 to 10 seconds, and then we will display the answer.
How do I? Okay.
Can we see the answer? Okay, so pretty much everybody did say, I think, all of the above. Maybe the question was too simple, or maybe I think we have a very, I think, informed audience. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pass on the baton to Ruchir Shukla of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. And before I do that, I would take this opportunity to thank Shakti Foundation for supporting this work that AEEE has been working on under the India e-mobility initiative. And we would also like to, I think, acknowledge, I think, the significant inputs and guidance that the team has received over, I think, the duration of these 2 years, which has allowed us, I think, to address some of the key issues and hopefully try to fill some of the gaps that I think we intended to fill out, I think, when this project got started. Mr. Ruchir Shukla, he is the director for the Electric Mobility Program, SHakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, and I'm going to request Ruchir to give his keynote address. Over to you, Ruchir.
Thank you, Dr. Satish. Shamashish, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and very good morning for joining us on this great occasion. Quickly, a few lines about SHakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, as Dr. Satish shared. The SHakti's core existence is to facilitate India's transition towards sustainable energy future by aiding the design and implementation of policies in key areas, example, electric mobility, clean power, energy efficiency, climate change mitigation, clean energy finance, and sustainable energy transportation. So these are the couple of areas where we have key interest in terms of working together with our partners. As we are about to draw the curtain on this great series of research projects which we are seeing running for almost 2 years, and have produced already 5 detailed research reports on various aspects of EV charging in India. On behalf of Shakti, let me welcome you all at the launch of this 6th and final report, namely VehicleGrid Integration. We refer here as VGI, a new frontier for electric mobility in India. As you know, EV charging is expected to have a more significant impact at the local level of distribution network. EV charging loads, as you are well aware, as well as charging points, are anticipated to be very dynamic with spurious spikes in the demand curve, and therefore has to be well addressed intelligently and smartly across deep power systems and distribution space to really maximize the advantages. Now, although EV adoption can potentially result in a substantial increase in revenues for the DISCOMs from additional electricity sales, it has its share of risk, as we just talked about, to electricity supply. This particular report is going to go a long way to enable effective and sustainable EV charging in the country. The aspects it has covered, the attempts to quantify a couple of advantages and concerns are really great for people to really look through and find a lot of guidance and inputs for their further progressing. Now, VGI can provide benefits or value-added services to the grid, society, the drivers, charge point operators, multiple segments of EV value chain by optimizing plug-in electric vehicle integration with the electric grid. As its name says, it's a very good interaction with the intelligence between the vehicle, its a storage system, stored energy, and with the grid. While VGI adds manifold benefits to overall EV charging ecosystem, especially the power generation and distribution point of view, it also provides a lot of saving options and earning opportunities to EV owners and users, especially if we see the people who are in remote and rural areas. A very good benefit for them as a backup supply for them. While there is a V2G, which is going to be used for anytime transactions of energy which is stored in the battery of the electric vehicle for revenue generation for them. The global market of VGI and its enabled technologies is expected to cross $1 trillion market by 2030, and expected CAGR is more than 30%. One of the previous reports from this research project highlights the potential impact of the additional load from EV charging on the DISCOM load profiles and the cost of supply. It also proposes a framework for determining appropriate tariffs for EV charging to hedge the risk, taking into account the interest of other key stakeholders like charge point operators, EV fleet managers. Today's report goes further to shed insight into the EV charging management solutions, which should be explored to upgrade the charging practice in the country and to leverage electric vehicles as a flexible grid resource, supplementing and complementing depending on the situation, geography, and place of use. We should not forget that the battery is the heart of EV, and almost 50% of the time, these vehicles are idle and they remain idle, while connected with the grid. So why not use the battery as a source of energy, its storage, and allow higher uptake of renewable energy as well, and make EV charging truly zero emission. Find out what promises vehicle to grid holds for us further. Thank you. And Shamashi, over to you for the question.
So thank you, Ruchir. Thank you for your time and for the thoughtful remarks. This is the polling question number 2, which is the most feasible and attractive benefit from vehicle grid integration. So we have about 10 seconds to choose the option. I don't know if you can display the outcome of the polling now. So Arun, could you please mention the result?
Yeah, so am I audible, Shamash?
Yes.
So maximum polling 53% is for peak shaving, 21% is for arbitrage opportunities, 5% for frequency regulation, and 21% as a RE storage unit.
Okay, thanks, Arun. So it seems like the overwhelming vote is in favor of peak shaving, which also makes sense because we have, already some DSM regulations. India has seen some DSM measures taken at state and at central level. So I think it makes sense that maybe the peak shaving intervention is more feasible and attractive, at least in the near term. Could you please go back to the presentation? Okay, so again, good morning, everyone. So after an exciting journey over past 2 years, today we are at the finale of an epic research endeavor, in my opinion. In the next 45 minutes, I'm going to share some of the major insights from our study on vehicle grid integration, a new frontier for electric mobility in India. So vehicle grid integration, or VGI, is pretty much a new concept and almost a virgin solution in the Indian market and also in most parts of the world. So the intent of this research and today's presentation is to shed some light on this frontier, which holds a lot of promise to solve many of the challenges or problems which potentially arise from the conventional EV charging practices which we are currently observing. So these are the key value additions from this research. The roadmap proposed in the study, I believe, would be very useful for the EV sector to develop a plan for implementation. And definitely all the major stakeholders in the EV ecosystem would have specific takeaways from this report. Now, electrification of vehicles has its share of benefits as well as risks to the power distribution utilities. While adoption can potentially lead to increase in revenue for DISCOMs from the additional sales, electricity sales, the gains may be accompanied by various risks. And the risks are at multiple levels, from the DISCOM service area to the feeder level. So at the service level, the risk could be, it will be mostly exaggeration of the peak power demand or the peak load, and also it may increase the line losses. EV charging is expected to have a more serious impact at the local level of the distribution network. So charging loads are anticipated to be very dynamic with spikes in the demand curve. So one of our previous reports on EV tariff, it shows how it can impact the load curve of a DISCOM and how it will then result in change in the cost of supply of the DISCOM. So this can potentially have a serious impact on the distribution network, especially in distribution areas with low available hosting capacity. So how to mitigate these impacts? There are passive ways as well as active ways. Passive management is where the EV users' charging behavior is influenced using specially designed electricity tariffs or incentives to encourage charging at a certain level or at a certain time. In case of active management, the charging rate can be controlled and or electricity can be fed back to the grid as and when required. And VGI is the collective term for all these charging management solutions. As we can see, smart charging or V1G helps in flattening the load curve, and V2G goes a step further to provide additional power to the utility during the peak hours or when the power demand is high. However, the benefits of VGI go beyond the load management, and they are shared by customers, distribution and transmission utilities, power market players, as well as they support the climate agenda of regulators and policymakers. So rightly, the California Public Utilities Commission has defined VGI as the many ways in which a vehicle can provide benefits or services to the grid, society, the EV driver, or the charge point operator by optimizing plug-in electric vehicle interaction with the electrical grid. Now, there are, so these are the four kinds of major broad categories of value streams identified for V1G and V2G. Some benefits are common for both V1G and V2G, and in some cases V2G offers additional benefits like arbitrage opportunity and utilization of EVs as a renewable energy storage. Now the question is, are V1G and V2G at par in terms of grid services value? As shown in this figure, V2G has an edge over V1G in providing grid services due to the bidirectional energy flow. The lines in the graph indicate how V1G and V2G can impact the EV state of charge. So this is for V1G and this is for V2G. In V1G's case, the charging can be done at different times, but eventually it reaches 100%, after which no further change can happen. In contrast, V2G enables the EV battery to be discharged and charged according to the needs of the grid, thus offering more flexibility. According to the International Energy Agency, V2G can potentially unlock 9 times more value than V1G. So it is crucial to keep in mind that many of those benefits can be realized if VGI is implemented on a large scale. Larger the scale, more value it can produce in terms of the grid flexibility services. So one can consider three levels for planning VGI implementation. So based on the value propositions, we have identified these 3 use cases: smart charging, aggregated smart charging, and large scale bidirectional charging, or V2G. Now, apparently, V2G based grid services are more attractive than V1G, but realizing those benefits may not be a straightforward task. There are major technological requirements that could potentially impact the on-ground implementation and the possibility of scaling up in the near future. So this table shows what are the EVSE related technical requirements to implement V1G and V2G vis-a-vis simple charging. As we can see, some are common for both V1G and V2G, but I would like to draw your attention to the fact that V2G requires some extra technical features which add considerable cost and complexity in project execution. And also the point that there are very few EVSE technologies available which can handle V2G, and also because of the requirement of advanced hardware, these EVSEs are also more expensive. Now let's see what about the electric vehicle. Again, here there are some major barriers with respect to V2G adoption. One potential showstopper for V2G is the issue with the automaker's warranty, although there are opposing views regarding the impact on the battery health. Also, only few EV models are found to be fit to participate in V2G. So the bottom line is V2G can potentially provide more flexibility services, but accompanied by higher complexity and cost of implementation. So this is a 3-dimensional matrix which shows the techno-economic comparison of V1G and V2G vis-a-vis unmanaged charging. So the size of the bubble depicts the relative estimated cost of implementation. So this matrix emphasizes the points which I just made actually regarding V1G and V2G, and would also like to highlight here that though unmanaged charging doesn't require any sophisticated technology in terms of EVSE or the EV, and therefore it is cheap to implement, but it potentially has considerable negative impact on the power system. That's why it's in the negative side of the x-axis. So after looking at the pros and cons, it appears that V1G could be a better scalable solution for the country in the near future. Now, EV adoption and integration with the power grid depend on the decisions and actions taken by different stakeholders. The stakeholders have different benefits to pursue, different barriers to overcome, and different perspectives on the uptake of EVs and their integration with the grid. That's why during the research, we reached out to the battery experts, DISCOMs, R&D institutions, fleet operators, and charge point operators to understand their views. Here, let me highlight the stance of fleet operators. As you can see, almost on all counts, they seem to have apprehensions about VGI, which doesn't augur well for VGI implementation in the country, because without their active participation, it will be really difficult to realize this transition actually. Now, from the consultation, what we understood that uncertainty regarding profitability for fleet operators is the underlying issue. And these are the 4 factors in this story. And we find it pretty important to examine further this profitability aspect. Some important recommendations also came out of the stakeholder consultation, like the need for conducting pilot projects to get hands-on experience and sensitizing regulators about the VGI solution and the required reforms to implement it. So now it is time for the third and last live polling. So the question is, which of the following VGI solutions is the Indian market ready to implement? Which of the following VGI solutions is the Indian market ready to implement? So Arun, if you can show the options on the screen. So we have about 10 seconds to choose our option. Arun, if you can display the outcome of the polling. And also please read out the answer on my behalf.
Yeah, so maximum polling has been received by smart charging, first option 50%, and aggregated smart charging has received 23%, and all of the above 27%. No vote for large scale bidirectional V2G charging.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Arun. And pretty interesting response, but I think it also makes sense. I mean, it's clear that V1G has some edge in terms of its feasibility to implement in the Indian context. Okay, let's come back to the presentation. So in the next few slides, I will talk about the importance of regulatory reforms for on-ground VGI implementation, especially in the Indian context. So a prerequisite for VGI adoption is appropriate price signals for electricity. And this is needed to shift EV charging to off-peak hours and coincide it with the renewable energy availability. Moreover, price signals are pretty much essential to encourage EV users to participate in such VGI programs. And the first and most simple step in providing such price signals is adopting time of use electricity rates. While TOU tariffs are useful in EV load management, they may become less effective as EV penetration increases. It may lead to some new peaks actually when the EVs start charging, because these TOU tariffs essentially are static tariffs. So the effective instrument is found to be the real-time electricity pricing. Going forward, we should try to adopt real-time electricity pricing or dynamic pricing. However, there is a concern that the customers may find it too complex. So let us see now, in brief, what is the present EV tariff framework in India. We find that the recognition of EV charging is not consistent across the states, and only in few states there is a separate tariff category for EV. We have detailed out on this thing in our EV tariff report, so please feel free to refer to that report, because this is pretty important in the context of VGI also. So having EV specific tariff is important in order to design a VGI program, because as I mentioned that tariff is pretty important, and unless there's a separate tariff category for EV, designing an EV specific tariff and other incentives would be really difficult actually. What about TOU tariffs for EV charging? So as we can see that there are only 3 states, Uttar Pradesh, Kerala and Maharashtra, that have introduced time of day rates, especially for EV charging. However, in few other states like Delhi, Chhattisgarh, some other states also, TOD rates are applicable to consumers by default against certain conditions. So we feel that initially the existing TOD rates can be utilized to implement VGI in these states in the initial phase to have some early experience out of this. So also recognizing EV as a grid resource is a fundamental regulatory step to enabling VGI, and EV aggregation is essential in order to adequately respond to the market signals. So these two are very important: recognition of EV as a grid resource and provision to aggregate these resources. Since EVs are mostly spread out over an area, so one has to check whether the applicable regulations permit the aggregation of such geographically dispersed resources. Now, what is the state of play in India? So there are supporting regulations like for demand side management and prosumers, but we find that they are not actually adequate. The major gap is the regulations have neither introduced the concept of resource aggregation nor defined the role of an aggregator. While regulations on prosumers pave the path to implement virtual power plants, the ability of the grid to interact with consumers, including prosumers, is crucial to realizing the benefits of V1G and V2G. And it is interesting to note that way back in 2015, the Forum of Regulators, FOR, developed a model smart grid regulations for adoption at the state level. But so far, my knowledge goes, none of the states has adopted that smart grid regulation. So that model regulation covers many of the elements of VGI, and definitely it can be then leveraged to implement VGI, provided the states adopt these regulations. Now, in my presentation, I emphasized on the need to aggregate these resources. So what are the ways, what are the models to do that? And it's a pretty new thing for the Indian power market. So let's see what are the different options actually. So one, based on the international practices and taking into account the local context, we find that there are 4 aggregator models, plausible models with varying levels of DISCOM involvement, which can be adopted in the country, starting with DISCOM acting as the sole aggregator. So I won't go into much details. So the report has much more details how these models work. But I would like to highlight here that in this model, the DISCOM would be the sole entity responsible for EV aggregation. And also for effective management, that's why the DISCOM has to have detailed knowledge about EVs, customers' travel behaviors and preferences, and other parameters, which definitely is beyond its traditional scope and business. Moreover, this approach has the risk of creating a market monopoly. Now, DISCOM may also act as the meta aggregator, where a non-DISCOM third-party aggregator can serve as the intermediary between the customer and the DISCOM. So in this case, the utility has no direct interaction with the customer, and the aggregator has no direct involvement in the wholesale market. However, a key limitation in this model is that by only allowing DISCOMs to represent the EV load in the wholesale market, it may reduce competition. In addition, the aggregators could be at the mercy of the DISCOMs in terms of compensation. In the case of a competitive aggregation market without DISCOM participation, non-DISCOM aggregators are solely responsible for aggregating the EVs to provide services both to the wholesale and the ancillary services market, and also to the DISCOM for distribution system benefits. For this, the DISCOM needs to develop price signals that reflect the costs and benefits of EV charging and grid services. The fourth model is pretty interesting. It is the hybrid market approach that allows DISCOMs and third-party aggregators to compete for customers rather than limiting the involvement of DISCOMs or other actors. In such a scenario, a regulatory framework would be very important to enable all these entities to compete on a level playing field and maximize opportunities to reap both wholesale and distribution benefits. There are other major gaps also, which can pose as barriers. To me, a key challenge to realize the benefits from VGI in India is the lack of an effective ancillary service market. This is pretty important. Without an ancillary service market, it's actually almost impossible to tap the entire range of benefits from VGI. So interconnection requirements and a uniform backend communication system, both are also critical areas where actions are necessary. With respect to the latter, backend communication system, we recommend that the central and the state nodal agencies, these are the two important oversight authorities in the country, should mandate all smart charging service providers to install OCPP compliant charging equipment and create a central cloud-based backend system adhering to the OCPP communication protocol, because this will enable then real-time charging data transfer to a central management system, CMS, and remote modification of charger configuration and remote charging session control. This will also allow the smart charging network to accommodate different charging technologies, electric vehicles, and charge point operators. So this is pretty important, actually, in my opinion. And so definitely, without fulfilling these requirements, the full benefits of VGI cannot be realized. So then what is the roadmap for India, considering the current level of maturity of the EV sector and the electricity market? So in our report, we recommend a phase-wise implementation at the three major levels of VGI, that is V1G, aggregated smart charging, and V2G can be considered sequentially, which means achievement of one can be regarded as the stepping stone to the next level. So as the country and the states take steps to fulfill the infrastructural requirements and bring the necessary regulatory and market reforms, we will be able to effectively implement VGI and achieve a thriving VGI services market which satisfies the local needs. Again, I am not going into the details. The report has kind of information on the prerequisites to reach to the next level of this pathway. So to conclude, there are different use cases of VGI, and each of them has unique value proposition and associated complexities. Depending on the scale of aggregation, EVs can deliver services at different levels of the electricity system, from bulk power markets to local distribution systems. By dynamically controlling EV charging and enabling the EV batteries to feed electricity back to the grid, V2G technology allows EVs to provide flexibility and additional capacity at the power system and distribution levels. However, in spite of these advantages, there are several significant technical and practical challenges to implement V2G at scale, especially in India. So existing projects have demonstrated that V1G is pretty effective in shifting a substantial share of the EV charging load to off-peak times, while still satisfying EV customers' charging needs. And the hallmark of smart charging is that its implementation is neither contingent on complex and expensive new electric vehicle or charging technologies, nor it requires significant regulatory and market reforms. Only appropriate price signals are the most important tool needed to implement V1G. However, definitely some bottlenecks exist in its implementation. So this is my concluding slide. Hope all of you have some takeaways from this study, and you find the insights very practical and useful. We will keep this conversation going online, so do visit our Twitter page to participate and tell us what you think. So definitely see you there. So now it is time to officially release the report. I would request Mr. Ruchir Shukla, Director of the Electric Mobility Program at Shakti, and Dr. Satish Kumar to join me to launch the report. So the report is web hosted both on AEEE website and Shakti's website. So it is now publicly available. Let me just quickly give you a look and feel of the report. So this is the table of contents. So it is quite detailed, and you can reach any particular section or subsection by just clicking here. And it has also some infographics also to make the understanding a bit easier actually. The program is now entering into a more exciting session. We have a panel discussion on the key findings of the study and the critical aspects of VGI. We are fortunate to have Mr. Praveen Neogi, Chief Advisor, Corporate Affairs, RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, and the guru of India's power sector. I consider him the guru of India's power sector, as the moderator of the panel discussion. So thank you, sir, for kindly accepting our request. Also, we have extremely knowledgeable panelists. I would like to welcome Mr. Avadhesh Jha, Vice President, Charge and Drive and Sustainability, Fortum Charge and Drive India Private Limited, Dr. Rahul Walalkar, President, India Energy Storage Alliance, Mr. Abhishek Ranjan, AVP, BCS Rajdhani, Mr. Vish Ganti, VP and Managing Director, Auto Grid India, and Mr. Nishant Saini, Managing Director, AAA Taxi. So welcome all of you. So without further ado, I would request Mr. Praveen Yogi to start this session. Sir, the floor is now yours. Mr. Praveen Yogi, am I audible?
So you are self-muted. Yes. We do have a housekeeping problem, so my apologies for that. We had certain glitches since the morning. Thank you so much. Am I audible now, and is the screen visible to all?
Sir. You are audible as well as visible.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, but, so sorry for spending a few more seconds on getting us right. Thank you, Shamash, once again, and congratulations to AEEE for launching the report, and to Dr. Satish Kumar as well, who must have steered in the process. Well, I do have a very knowledgeable panel around me, and in order to adhere to the time schedule, I'll seek a few indulgences from my panelists. If they would allow me to address them by first name, so that will lead to economy of time. And two, we'll like to format the discussion in the following manner. I have two broad questions to start with, which the panelists can take as we take the discussions around the table, and then we will try, based on the discussions that emerge, then and the responses we have from the panelists, then we will try and have the questions more formatted and be specific to panelists can then fly their trade. So without spending much time, if I may just pose the two questions to start with, based on the presentation that has been made and the responses we have had from the audience, and that looks quite interesting. To all the panelists, and we can take it one by one. Would you see EVs as mobile power plants which can charge anywhere and deliver the power anywhere? That's question number two. Question number two is so, whether you answer in the affirmative or in the negative, then what would be the building blocks for a holistic EV charger infrastructure design, so that we can enable VGI via managed charging, and should the debate be between AC and DC charging, fast and slow charging, or should it be an either-or option? So, Amadesh, can we start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Praveen. I hope I'm audible to all. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So,
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So this is a good questions to begin with, and I strongly believe that electric vehicle with the more and more renewable in the grid is a perfect combination. And because for the solar and the wind, you would be requiring to set up in any case and balancing a storage, which will attract an additional cost to the discoms or to the end consumer. And that's the reason you are seeing that in the last couple of years, government is trying to do the storage with the solar, and they are not finding a success in developing that because of the cost. An electric vehicle, you know, with the 30 kilowatt, 40 kilowatt battery sitting in the car, and so that gives you a tremendous amount of the flexibility. So to address your first question, Praveen, that this is an absolutely power plant which should be harnessed. And as a country, we are a resource-starved country. We should not at all envisage investing in the stationary storage as a standalone project. Rather, you know, after 5 years or 6 years of utilization of the electric vehicle, those batteries can be utilized as a stationary storage. That would be a good optimal utilization of the resource on a national level. I'm not talking about the individual level, the national level. So vehicle is a powerhouse. We should try to utilize that. That's number one, to address your first question. The second question, on the charging infrastructures, yes, the V2G, strictly when we talk of the V2G, where the vehicle would also start delivering the power to the grid, yes, that would require some more time globally, because that requires a bidirectional, not only the battery, but the charger itself. And currently, to my best understanding, except for the Shademo charger, rest of the chargers are not bidirectional in capability. You know, Rahul probably can bring in more value there because he might have better information. But the CCS is trying to do that. So this will take some time. And I tell you, you know, as far as our company is concerned, we have been doing an experiment on the V2G. In Oslo, we had done an experiment where we had only 800 kilowatt connected load from the grid, and we managed a load of 2.2 kilowatt. So there we had the V2G concepts also done. And as far as managed charging is concerned, we are doing it. And in India, I'm happy to share with you that with one of the distribution companies, shortly we will be doing a managed charging where, you know, our remote system, the CMS, will be delivering or will be distributing the available power between the different vehicles. So for the same connected load, we can deliver, we can service more number of vehicles by the managed charging. And in the current operation in Hyderabad, we have also started experimenting time of the day tariff. You know, even though the Telangana doesn't have the time of the day electricity tariff on the EV side, but on our own, we are trying to experiment that how the consumer behavior shifts, you know, if we introduce this one. And I'm happy to share that during the last one, you know, we are seeing some tractions there. Though still it is at a very infancy stage, no concrete analysis can be done, but it is showing some progress that yes, time of the use tariff has some meaning, particularly for the fleet, not for the individual, because I will not go in the night to charge except from my home, but for fleet, it makes much more sense. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Rahul?
Yeah. So thank you, Prabir-ji, and first of all, thank you, Shamasis and AEEE for doing this report and initiating this dialogue. I agree with Avdesh that EVs can be a very good resource for the grid. In fact, the way we are seeing the penetration of more distributed renewables, which is expected to grow in next few years, perhaps electric vehicles would be the only savior for the distribution companies, where right now they are otherwise facing a challenge where the peak load on the distribution system is increasing and their average utilization of the distribution network is falling down. And with the kind of tariff structures we have in the country, where majority of the customers are actually getting subsidized, distribution companies are going to be in a very tough situation. So I think if electric vehicles as a flexible load can be used, then that would be a savior. One part I would like to maybe slightly have a different opinion than Avdesh is I don't think electric vehicles will replace the need for the stationary storage. Again, in terms of the second life batteries, yes, there is a potential where the second life batteries can become a stationary grid resource. But based on the current analysis, what we have done, we believe that those second life batteries will be primarily be utilized just as a backup applications, as a replacement for maybe existing lead acid batteries, and not as a primary batteries which can be used for maybe 2 cycles or 3 cycles per day for grid balancing or support. And the reason for that is that we just assume that lithium-ion batteries are all same, but there is a wide range of batteries which are available in terms of the chemistries, as well as within same chemistry, the quality of batteries which are used. And typically the batteries which auto OEMs are currently using for these electric vehicles, those are meant for only around 700 to maybe 1500 cycles as a life, if you're considering as a full discharge cycles. So when you're already using the electric vehicle for its desired life of whatever, maybe 100,000 or more kilometers, with the sizes of batteries which are used in India, we think that there will be only maybe at maximum few hundred cycles which would be left in the second life batteries. So repurposing those automotive batteries, converting that into a new battery packs, testing and reinstalling it for just 100 cycles or more, that would end up actually killing the economics of those. But at the same time, for backup applications where you are expecting only maybe some 15-20 cycles to be used in a year as a backup emergency purpose, I think these batteries can serve the purpose very well. So I think from the grid reliability perspective, there will still be a need for stationary storage. The other part I would like to just draw a discussion, and I would urge AEEE to maybe focus on this in their communication with DISCOMs, since they have a very good positioning with regulators and other stakeholders. I think we need to move away from discussion around the time of the day tariff, because right now in India, basically time of the day tariff, apologies for being frank, it is just a joke. We just keep up like a separation of some 50 paise or 1 rupee as a difference between on-peak and off-peak tariff, and we think that should serve the purpose. Now that can give some incentive for people to shift load where there is no additional cost. But when you are trying to store energy in a battery and try to reuse, there is a pretty significant cost involved with that. And in places like Korea or other places where people have used these batteries for such application, the difference between the peak tariff and off-peak tariff is somewhere 4 or 5x. It is not 10%, 15%, or even 50%. It is 4 or 5x, and that's the type of tariff. Unless we can come up with basically it will be a waste of the battery resource for using it for these applications. And that's where probably I think in the survey which was done, the fleet operators rightly are hesitant in using the electric vehicles for providing grid services, because they will get a lot more usability and value by continuing to use those as a fleet vehicle and provide those services. So these are the things where I think we need to identify the real use cases where the electric vehicles can actually provide the value, and these could be in terms of capacity for the grid. So it is not about maybe using it daily, but using it maybe 10 days or 20 days in a year, where it is eliminating need for certain distribution upgrade or those type of aspects, where that should be something which is manageable from the penalty. But then DISCOMs also need to step up, or the regulators specifically, more than DISCOMs. I think DISCOMs have quite knowledgeable people, but regulators needs to actually allow DISCOMs to look at these type of flexible resources as a capacity resource for the grid. Because on one side, if you keep on approving all the system upgrades on either transmission or distribution side as a capex investment, and then if you want to make electric vehicles just compete on a marginal value only for a few days a year, then that entire economics is again not going to work. So this is something where fundamentally we need to look at it as a holistic system approach and identify what are the key areas where electric vehicles can become a valuable grid resource. And we as a company, Customized Energy Solutions, have had experience of some of these areas for now more than 10 years. We were involved in the first V2G pilot, which was done at University of Delaware, where along with AES, one electric vehicle was used for doing frequency regulation. We also right now work with Vish and his team in California, where we aggregate the fleets which are managed by AutoGrid and then provide interface to the California ISO market. Similarly, we are managing more than 100 electric vehicles in PJM market. So yes, there are technically, I think there are now very less problems, and especially the way the battery technologies are evolving now. And we are talking about million-mile batteries. I think some of the limitation which I mentioned earlier, where currently most of the auto OEMs are using batteries with only 1,000 cycles. So those within next maybe 3 to 4 years will go away. So we should definitely look at creating a right regulatory framework and market structures which will enable vehicle to grid. But then we need to just wait a little bit for the technology to arrive. And as Avdesh mentioned, it is not just about the batteries. It is about the charging infrastructure and making sure that the charging infrastructure is able to do the two-way communication. But in the meantime, right now, I think the low-hanging fruit is, I think, what is called as a V1G, although I don't like the term V1G. I think it is just a smart charging is probably a more representative term for that. Or there is in Japan, they use the term V2H or vehicle to home, where you are maybe still getting some extracting energy from the car batteries, but not transferring it to the grid, but just using it on the load side so that the regulatory issues are limited. So there are all these different options which are available, which can be used with the right regulatory structure.
Well, thank you. And can I ask Abhishek to come in now? Abhishek? Are you there, Abhishek?
I'm here, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, may I request you to please repeat your question? Sorry for this.
Okay, if there are two broad questions. Abhishek, do we see EVs as mobile powerhouses which can charge anywhere and deliver that power anywhere? And two, in fact, this is where you come in quite strongly. And the second question is that what should be the building blocks for a holistic EV charging infrastructure design to enable VGI via managed charging?
Thank you for the question. This is the same question, I think, for the whole panel. I guess. Sorry for asking you again. Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you. Now, this is a very pertinent question in the sense like an EV or electric vehicle provides you as a load as well as a source. And this is very typical of this class of demand or this class of a load, which is not found anywhere. It's a mobile load and mobile source as well. It can be charged in a particular area and it can discharge in a particular area, provided that V2G or vehicle to grid kind of facility is enabled. Whether it is inside a home or inside a public or outside a home in a public charging space, etc. Obviously, technology is there, they are being deliberated. Yes, the answer is yes, this is going to be a big boon for this as a distributed energy resource and managed charging, where these resources can be tapped by a DSO. The point is, in all these transactions, visibility is very important. Whether it is directly to the DSO or through aggregators to the DSO, visibility is very important. And around that, there has to be a business model. I think this report is talking about 3 or 4 business models, which is very prudent. And visibility of the business model, if it is there, it can be done very well. Managed charging on that count. So that is my response to your mobile load, which can be charged anywhere and delivered anywhere. But second point is, what are the modalities in terms of integration with the grid? So we have a net metering regulation that is a commercial element. We also have a CEA regulations for connectivity of distributed energy resources to the grid. What are the changes which have to be made in those regulations? The report talks about protocols like OpenADR and ISO. So these changes would have to be made in the technical grid connectivity regulations, and I don't think they are of very big deal. They can be done, provided you have sufficient pilots of vehicle to grid kind of transformation. Because the grid to vehicle managed charging, passive and active, more or less they have been piloted. We have also done some pilots here. Mr. Avdesh is here. They have done quite a lot in Europe and elsewhere in the country. And we have Vish also here. We have been working together, and he has been doing a lot of these things across states and Europe. So Whereas G2V is not a problem. It has been piloted and prompted. It can be immediately onboarded in the CEA technical regulations for grid connectivity of electric vehicles. In fact, CEA has come out with the safety regulations for electric vehicles. They have already come out with that in the last year, 2019. They can specify whether OpenADR or OCPP, these things can be there, which will be useful for EVSE to grid kind of communication. So that will be wonderful, and this can be rolled out. Whereas vehicle to grid is concerned, that may take some time because some threshold size has to be there. Not a single vehicle can come and discharge. B, that bidirectional chargers at what price points they are available and when they are available in India is also a question. As of now, we are talking about widespread charging, distributed charging across the grid, which is homogeneous, and that will also not put burden on the grid upgradation just for the want of EV charging, because that is ultimately going to the era and the entire consumer base, which may not be allowed. Likewise, we don't want to burden EV tariff also with, say, for example, in Delhi, you don't have a fixed charge on the. So if more and more high quantum and large size of connectivity for EVs will be demanded at concentrated locations, definitely commission or the discoms will put for the demand charges, again, which may not augur well for the EV sector, which is right now in a very infancy stage. We don't want that. So how can we utilize the initial days, of course, without any demand charge and manage charging, both active and passive managed charging, tariff TOD, which should have a deterrent kind of impact, not a very small one. Like in Delhi, you have plus minus 20%, which is not going to play an important role. That's what we have seen. That is applicable on EV tariff. So here I'll take a pause and over to you, Mr. Praveen Yogi. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Vish, can I request you to come in, please?
Yes, sounds good. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, perfect. So first of all, I'm really excited to share my thoughts here, and congratulations to the AEEE team for rolling out the report. It's actually quite an interesting report in the sense that although this report focuses heavily on EV charging and EVs, but the concept of aggregation and different business models around aggregation is still fairly new in India. That's actually applicable across the board, not just from electric vehicles, but also other type of DERs, residential battery storage, air conditioners. The fundamental idea of how an aggregator is brought in between a utility and a consumer to manage these contracts, to enroll them into these programs, that's a very, very novel idea for in the Indian market. I don't think a lot has been explored in this space, although we always try to focus heavily on the technical aspects of whether V1G is possible or V2G is possible. I think there's always a roadmap to getting there, right? So the fundamental thing is the market constructs are not there for any sort of DSM beyond just energy efficiency today, right? So you don't have any incentive for consumers for actually enrolling their valuable assets, their investments into these programs, if you even think of it. And even if they are, they should be substantial enough that makes the opportunity cost pay for it. For example, if a consumer is saying, I'm going to give an X percentage or life of my car's battery for this grid services, it should be more beneficial for me to give this, donate these hours of life on the car than driving, which is the sole purpose of the vehicle. So how will that cost benefit analysis be made in such a way that it entices consumers to enroll into these programs? This is a fundamental problem, right? So it's more of a business model, regulatory construct, market design issue than a technical issue. And in the US, in other markets, we've seen it with other players and we've done it ourselves, starting from just capacity DR, demand response, shifting load across and valley filling or load building, as they call it, moving load to a different time. These are all different use cases that can be done if one or two fundamental decisions are taken. Number one, every charger that is getting rolled out should be controllable and communicable. right? The fundamental problem that you face today, and this is an issue that we saw in the US, is 80% of the chargers that are sold in the market today do not have any controllability. There is no communication to these chargers. So, which means that you have to pay customers to go install another type of a charger, which has Wi-Fi or 3G or a 4G connection onto it. So that makes it controllable for any type of optimization across different systems. So I think in terms of the regulatory requirements, it is very important to push the EV OEMs as well as car, sales stores to push EV chargers that have communications built onto them first. That's the base fabric that you need to deploy, right? The second is upstream from the charge point operator to the utility. I think you will see an ecosystem of players, people who we've not even thought will come into this business. I'll give you a good example. Back when we saw the PCO revolution, which was this ISD, the phone box, right? These basically were put in front of small mom and pop stores, and people just basically installed them and connected it with the phone line, and all they did was either prepay, recharge these phones. I think the same kind of idea might be thought of in the context of EV chargers, where you may have in villages, or you may have a small phone booth, a small booth, where the guy is just having like 5 or 6 EV chargers, and he's just making margin on top of kilowatt hours. I think those sorts of market constructs have to be brought to bear. And I think EVs are a very interesting load, definitely more flexible than most loads. Another very important aspect is the rate of response. They're very quick responding loads, as opposed to other type of loads which may take an hour or 2 hours to respond to a signal for a grid service. EV chargers can charge and stop charging immediately if you have that communication. So the key to this is to make it as frictionless as possible, make it easy for consumers to enroll into these programs, make the signals pass from the DSO all the way down to all of these different types of aggregators who might play a role. It could be a car charging company, it could be a e-mobility or a taxi service. There are various players who could bring their fleets onto this platform, and I think creating a very fair way to compensate all of these different platforms or systems is going to be essential. Yeah, over to you, Prabir.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Why I say, I'm so excited that, amongst the panelists, the way you are providing the coverage of the subjects, there would be hardly follow-up questions. And if they are, I would rather flip them over to other panelists to get a wider viewpoint. So it's your turn now, Nishan, to come in. Over to you.
Hi. Am I audible?
You are.
Great. Good afternoon to all the fellow panelists, attendees. Congratulations to AEEE for this launch. Prabir, you've put me on the last spot, which makes my job more difficult, because after speaking, after talking with all the experts already, shed some light on the topic, but I'll try my best. So first question, EV as a mobile unit. Okay. Abroad and in India perspective, it depends upon the cars also. So let's say in my limited knowledge, I think out of the 4 countries, probably Japan would have sort of mastered the technology of V2G or V2X concept. Maybe it covers home, building, vehicle to everything concept. And the cars which were used, Nissan has 2 models, Nissan Leaf and Nissan NVE NV200, which has the capacity to put back the charge back to the vehicle or building or anybody. And Hyundai iX35 has also been done by Deaf University as a car which can plow back the charge into the building. In India, we have Mahindras and Tatas who have brought out 2 vehicles only as of now in terms of mass market, e-Verito or Tigor, where the capabilities also do not exist. And as everybody rightly said, auto OEMs, the battery chemistry itself or the charge cycle itself is very low. For any fleet operator to exercise the cost versus benefit comparison, that if we were to plow back this energy back to the grid or to any building, my battery will drain, not even, it will not work for 3-4 years or 5 years also for me to have a better TCO as compared to the IC engine. Now, with the IC engine vehicles, with BS6 coming in and probably the CAFE norms coming in next year, it is almost at the purchasing power parity with the fiscal, non-fiscal incentives, which EV gets in India. But I think the car capability is not yet. In Japan, yes, the mobile units are being worked at, for blackouts, outages, for hospitals, for some departmental stores also it's being worked out. It is some years away from India. So I believe as of now, one-way integration like taking the charge and from the grid is one option. However, many companies, we are also speaking with various companies who can do solar charging. So solar unit can be set up somewhere else, and you have charging infra somewhere else, and sort of net metering can be done. That can be done, is possible, but V2G is probably not possible for few years. How charging infra can be done in aggregation, I believe there is somebody already mentioned that this report has a OCPP protocol, or communication is very important. So as of now, the charges which we have from the DC001 charges which we have, it has OCPP protocols, but you also have to remember they are still working on a 2G network SIM card. They're not even 4G network SIM card. So if you were to do better communication to and fro with the charger and the car integration, that has to get upgraded. The car protocols also with the auto OEMs are only read-only. They do not work on write-only. So there has to be a communication protocol between the charger and the car also. So if you were to do something with the car. Okay, so I believe as of now, like Avdesh, Abhishek, and everybody is, setting up charging stations across the country, doing various pilots. We are also, doing it in Delhi, NCR, and Hyderabad. And I think with some success, we can say it is doing fairly well. As Avdesh mentioned, we are in Telangana. We are also trying to manage that the installed capacity of that charging station is higher than the sanctioned load capacity of that particular site. So I am to believe, Avdesh, that can be done through a controller, and managed charging can be done. But some people have also come back to us saying that you cannot have higher installed capacity than your sanctioned load capacity. So that is also, so if that is the case, that may go into building block in terms of regulation, and Abhishek I think can throw some light on it, that if we, let's say, have a 100 kilowatt sanctioned capacity, can I install 150 charger capacity there and then have a controlled or a smart charging done? So I think that is from me, and I'll take a pause here. Over to all the other panelists. Thank you.
So Mr. Prabir, if I can respond to him, or should I come in later?
Yes, Abhishek, what I'll be doing, you will have, I will be pairing you with each of the speakers, because my idea is that if VGI and managed charging are to succeed, then obviously the active interface with power system operations, with network planning, and the configuration, we will have to be in sync. So, you will have plenty of opportunity to respond to what Nishant just said. And as I said, I'll be bringing you in with each of the speakers now, depending on the flow of the discussions that have taken place so far. I'll get back to Rahul. Rahul, you did say that EV is the savior. I would also believe so, given the state of affairs we are in power sector. But two quick questions, and this time, we'll do a very quick kind of response, and at the appropriate time, I'll bring Abhishek in. Rahul, the first question is, you have also been a votary of storage being used as a market resource, generically speaking, right? What would you see the contracting, regulatory, and the compensation mechanisms to emerge to provide a sense of comfort to the market participants on one side and lead to a doable business model? That's question number one. My question number two is again building on what you had said about battery technology being V2G compliant. Would you also see, and you also batted for standalone batteries, the second-hand usage, as well as the V2G compliant batteries as different segments, right? So would you also believe that the cost of wear and tear of batteries may outstrip the economic benefits arising out of batteries being V1G or V2G compliant? So these are the two quick questions. And Abhishek, as I'll bring you in when Rahul finishes, and I have some pointed questions for you. Thank you.
Sure. So thank you, Praveerji. So for the first question, in terms of what type of a market structure, I think the biggest thing we need to look at the marginal pricing for electricity and any ancillary services. The problem right now we have this regulatory framework where everything we try to work on an average pricing. And when we are looking at resources like the electric vehicles or even stationary energy storage, the key value of that is it is not necessarily that every day of the hour it will have the same value. But there are definitely certain times of the day when you are using some inefficient resources, these energy storage devices are much better. And depending on if you're looking at these storage devices as a behind the meter resource or as a in front of a dedicated resource, the economics and the kind of market structures required could be different. But right now, to start with, based on the work which as the India Energy Storage Alliance we have done it, we still feel that next 3-4 years the Indian market is going to be dominated by behind the meter resources, because that's the area where customers are anyway investing in having backup batteries with lead acid or other. Whereas now these new batteries and new technologies enable them a better option, but at the same time there is some marginal extra cost which they have to pay for better performance. And actually, in terms of the total cost of ownership, now the new batteries are even actually better than the existing batteries if you are going to use them to some substantial level. But because in India we specifically have this constraint where we take a lot of decisions just on the upfront cost, it is very important that we also show these additional revenue streams to the customer so that they can take such decisions. That's something which is to answer your first question. I'm just blanking on the second one. Can you just repeat the second question?
Yeah, what I had posed was, would you believe that the cost of battery wear and tear may outstrip the economic benefits arising out of V2G or V1G applications?
Sure. So I would split it in two parts. So for V1G, I think again as a flexible load, I think there is no extra cost, because if you charge the battery or electric vehicle at middle of the day or in the evening or at night, the cost in terms of the wear and tear of the battery is same, unless you are charging at a different rate. But typically the charging will be just determined by the type of charger what you have. So there is no additional cost in terms of the battery if you can use the vehicle as a flexible load. So that is there is no issue with that. But right now with the current technologies, if you are thinking about in terms of the marginal cost for the battery, you would need somewhere around maybe 7 to 8 rupees, or in some cases, worst cases, even around 10 rupees per unit as a revenue which needs to come in before electric car owner decides to provide that value to the grid. And right now, I don't see under current regulatory structure or with the current DISCOM tariff structures, there is any scope for that. So except where customer is maybe using some diesel generator as an emergency, and if he wants to use it, then that may be on a selective basis. But otherwise, that 8 to 10 rupee kind of a difference is not there. But the good part is, as the technology is evolving with the higher cycle life and also lower capital cost, these numbers are going down exponentially. So we do expect that within next 3 to 4 years, this number will come down from 10 rupees to somewhere between 3 to 4 rupees. And at that time, if actually we have some truly efficient time of the day structures, and particularly dynamic pricing, where it is not necessarily every day, but maybe 100 days in a year, you have this substantially high tariff difference, and that more than 4 rupee tariff difference should easily be possible.
Rahul, thank you. And Abhishek, would you now come in? you should respond. You can respond to Nishant's, point. And two, I have two specific questions for you. One is, how do you see the network responding, considering under E2V, of course, under V2G, of course, that when batteries are discharging, they would be in different states of charge. So that's one. So it's a kind of dynamic, discharging and bundling of, the EVs that would take place. What is the voltage of application you are looking at for both V1G and V2G applications? And third, your take on the readiness of the ancillary services market for grid services to take shape by way of managed charging. Abhishek.
Thank you. First, there are three questions which have been asked to me. One is how network responds in V2G scenario, because this is a very dynamic scenario. I'll take that one first. Then we'll talk about the voltage of application of both V2G and G2V. And third one, you talked about what is my take on the readiness of the ancillary services market in this country and how it's going to pan out. Yeah, the first question is how the network is responding in G2V and V2G. Obviously, most of the charging, majority of the charging is going to happen in the low tension network, that is 400 volts, 3-phase, or even below single phase. If it is, you're talking about private charging. So private charging means home charging or destination charging. That is going to happen at either 433 volts or maybe 230 volts, single phase also. So here, the grid readiness of the charger. I'll give you a parallel between the net metered, grid connected or grid tied solar inverter or grid tied battery inverters we have, which is already there, and there are technical standards for that. And as you know, the solar generation is varying with time of the day. So the dynamic export or import situation also varies, and that is being managed by what? By inverter. And there are set standards for the same. That is a grid tied inverter. And therefore, the resilience of the grid and the resilience of the inverter is there to take care of the variability. Similarly, if you talk about the various state of charging of the battery storage, which we are thinking of discharging to the grid. Now, this can happen at multiple levels. A, it could be at a megawatt scale, wherein we are saying that there is a parking lot, and the grid code specifies that maybe it has to happen at 11 kV. So there is a parking lot which is having maybe few hundred electric vehicles with minimum threshold of the electric vehicle battery SOC defined, all together connected, plugged, and then discharging at the same point of time at 11 kV. These thresholds can easily be determined. I think they're already there in Europe and States. This can be easily defined where they can offer a grid support service. That can be done. And here it could be a aggregator model. The aggregator could be the parking operator. He can have a subscription of different these vehicle owners. For example, we have taxis and the shared mobility. They have hub model of charge. They can be a aggregator and they can provide these services to the load dispatch centers or the DSOs at the 11 kV level. And this is really possible through the grid tied up inverter. We also have a hybrid inverter in case of, for example, rooftop solar plus battery storage is there. So technology is not a challenge. Only thing is we have to enable this provision in the regulation saying that such thing will be allowed, and they have to follow a basic rule of technical grid connectivity, which is already there by C. Now, the network will respond in this in one way. For example, when you there is a frequency and area curve. So when you talk about there is a high demand and the supply is on a lower side, obviously frequency dips, and then network responds in a way that that frequency is coming down, and vice versa. So here the appropriate signals can be given to these particular aggregated sites which are connected at 11 kV that you discharge at a time when the frequency, it could be a frequency response, or it could be a energy arbitrage use case wherein they are saying that you now discharge because at this point in time my grid is getting overloaded, why don't you discharge? and when you discharge, you will be relieving of the upper limit or the upstream of the network. So these are all commercial driven. Technology is already mature. It can be done, provided the grid tied charger, which are there with appropriate safety features in case of reverse power flow. Just like we have a grid tied inverter in case of solar, utility scale solar also, as well as rooftop solar, it can be there in the charge. Now coming back to the low voltage. Low voltage means home charging. Even people like you and me, individual consumers, maybe I have a 10 kilowatt connection, and this will also be an answer to Mr. Nishant's question. Suppose I have a 10 kilowatt connection in my home. I'm a residential user. Now I can apply for a separate EV connectivity. Why? Because there is a commercial arbitrage. I have some discounted tariff available and also a separate TOD for EV load available to me by a regulator, hypothetically, for example. I can do that. There is no limit that I can apply beyond the sanction load, or I can't apply for that. There is no limit. Only technical limit is this particular service has to be given by my service line, and that service line is being served from a local distribution transformer. So the distribution transformer's technical limit will be the limit. And as per the respective supply code regulations of different states, it is in first come first serve basis. So for example, I am going there, and if there is enough juice in the distribution transformer, I'll be given for. At least in Delhi, we do not restrict, and this is true for solar also. We do not restrict any capacity. For example, my 10 kilowatt sanction load, I give him say even 200 kilowatt solar capacity, a net metering connection, and convert him to a HT connection. He doesn't get his sanction load increased, and therefore there is no increased burden of the fixed cost on the consumer. Similar way can happen here. Now, so in my case, as an individual consumer, I would like to have a charger which is bi-directional, just like I have a solar PV rooftop in my home, maybe 5 kilowatt rooftop solar, grid tied inverter is there. I'll also have a grid tied EV charger, which is talking to the grid through OpenADR protocol, and it has ways and means of connected through a net meter. The EV meter could be a net meter, and it is exporting and importing. And there is a meter which is discharging from the car, and through the EV charger, this is getting pumped into the grid at LV or low voltage network, just like solar is pumping in the excess solar exported in the LV network at the low voltage. Finally, the readiness of the ancillary services market. Yes, I am very excited by the FERC's recent order, Federal Electricity Regulatory Commission in the United States. They have talked about the DERs can also participate in the wholesale market. Now, this is called a landmark judgment. And if my memory is correct, they passed it by 2-1 vote in FERC. Now, these kind of revolutionary ideas and regulations, decisions have to be made. For example, here, when you talk about that, why can't these vehicles or electric vehicles can participate in the wholesale market? In the wholesale market, I'm not talking about only the energy market. Rightly said, sir, you talked about the ancillary market. This can be a very, very good candidate for primary ancillary market, where we are talking the response time from milliseconds to seconds. So as far as market sense is concerned, my sense goes, yes, CERC is working on it. I think USAID is also working along with the CERC. We are looking forward to something maybe in 2021, just like we saw something in RTM. If everything goes well, probably we'll have some indication by the MOP and the Regulatory Commission next year. That is my sense, my personal sense. I don't claim to be responding on somebody's behalf. That MBED might also be in place next year. And together with that, probably some sense of primary ancillary market, because we have an RRAS regulation, Reserve Regulatory Ancillary Services, but that regulation is a regulated tertiary ancillary service, wherein the existing coal-based stations are called upon service up regulation and down regulation by the RLDCs. Here it will be market-based, wherein they respond immediately. So that might come as early as maybe next year or so. That's what my sense. But in a limited format, not in the avatar we have seen in the United States or the other. What you, sir?
Thank you, Abhishek. So all in all, I would see that the panelists are saying that we are ready for it. The electricity market is not far behind in terms of accepting that technology and launching the regulations. which are certainly taking shape because it's an evolving process. I would now pose the next two questions to Avdesh and Vish together, and then at the end ask Abhishek again to respond very quickly, because I would definitely say, please suppose that so long we achieve the active interfacing with the power system operations, we are going to see that the light of the day for the proposal to emerge. So to Avdesh, and Vish, my question would be that you have seen the revised guidelines of Ministry of Power on EV charging infrastructure. And they have come up with a proposal of a public charging infrastructure, which is to be placed in a 3 km by 3 km grid and at a distance of 25 kilometers on both sides of the road. And for heavy duty vehicles, the fast chargers would have to be at 100 kilometer distance, again on each side of the highway. Now, how would the concept and the context of VGI would fit in with this kind of a policy guideline when you are getting somewhat hamstrung, by the distance limitations? And how would, again, the interconnection arrangements, the industry agreements, the communication protocols, and the interoperability standards would also, how would these evolve if VGI has to take place, but within the framework of the existing policy guidelines? And all what we need would be, the data transfer, the two-way communications, and some remote control of charging sessions, if not modifying the charging infrastructure. So what would be your take on the acceptability of VGI and onward to V2G with the policy framework we have in place today? Over to you, Avdesh, and then Vish. We can't hear you, Avdesh. You're mute.
Yeah, sorry. So as far as Ministry of Power's guidelines is concerned, see, the way I look at it, that this is just the initial days, and the initial days, the government's objective is to, make more and more chargers available to the people, and less from the V2G and the V1G concept. It's more to make the people that yes, the chargers are available. And so this should not be seen from that perspective that this is directed towards that. So neither this would be an enabler, nor would be a, I would say, the impediment for going for this, because it is to be seen in the context that this guidelines which government has come up is generally applicable where the government is giving the subsidies. As far as the rest of the charging network is concerned, that is not to be governed entirely by these particular guidelines. So, and with the subsidies, government is putting up around 2,000, 3,000 chargers, because whatever they can set up within 1,000 crores of budget under FAME2, that would be the, the boundary conditions. Having said so, as far as chargers are concerned, I would like to also address some of the panelists' concerns that, in India, so the advantage of India being the laggard in terms of the EV adoption is that they know the fallacies of the developed countries, what they have gone through. And we can, right from the day one, we can remedy that. And that's why most of the chargers which we have seen in India, and I'm talking about the charger means EVSE. I'm not talking of the 15 amp socket, which is also being termed as a charger in India. But I'm not talking to that. I'm talking to the EVSE equipment. And in India, wherever you have the EVSE equipment, either it's a AC001 or DC001 or CCS or SHATEMO, every charger has a communication protocol, and it is complied with the OCPP requirement. And this is also the government's requirement also. The DHI's requirement is mandatory that once you have a charger of AC001, DC001 or this, you have to have a communication protocol. There should be a digital payment compatibility that, it can do the digital transactions. So from the infrastructure point of view, clearly, the chargers are capable of being managed or offering the managed services on the V1G. The only thing what we require, because when you talk about the managed charges, clearly in India, like I'm giving you an example, in our backend systems, on the cloud-based systems where we manage the charging infrastructure, we have this managed charging feature, the load balancing feature. So you have a 100 kilowatt load connected from the grid, but we are serving to, let's say, 200 kilowatt of connected load chargers. So there are 4 vehicles of requiring 50 kilowatt, but I have only limitation of 100 kilowatt. So our systems can downgrade the demand of the vehicles, and it will supply only 25 kilowatt each, so that it remains within the connected load and doesn't impact the grid. So the grid has given 100 kilowatt, it will manage within the 100 kilowatt. Similarly, we have through the pricing, we have a dynamic pricing and we have a time of day pricing through which you can manage these charging as well. So on the V1G side, it's more a play of, I would say, the CMS, the charger management systems. They have to enable it, and those things are more or less in every CMS you'll find that features. On the vehicle manufacturer side in India, that is being now developed, because earlier there was no demand for that. But now, like we are doing a pilot, so we have asked the manufacturers to enable that load balancing feature in their system itself, in their vehicle itself, and it's a part of this, this ultimately the software side. So that can be done. So I don't think that whether we have a 25 kilometer guidelines currently or a 3x3 network currently, these are more from the enabling side, where they want to put first the chargers are there, people can go and charge the vehicle, and as the time comes, these things will automatically, the market will determine this, and market will drive this one. So I'm confident that when the time will come, because V1G things are moving, on the V2G it will take some time and the system will automatically pick up. Where is my challenge is on the grid side. See, the problem with the grid is that in India we have a concurrent subject list on the power, and electricity is a very political issues like agriculture, right? So and then see, currently we are talking of BSES, and when we are talking of the discoms, unfortunately we are keeping a reference of BSES, Tata Power, Torrent. We should also keep a reference that we have a Bihar distribution company, we have a UP distribution companies, we have a Telangana distribution companies, we have a Hyderabad distribution companies. They are not that efficient like Bescoms or like the BSES. They don't have surplus power. So how to improve the electricity infrastructure to cater to this grid? In Telangana we are operating. Praveen, you will not believe we are for even LT side, we are paying 3 lakh rupees for getting the electricity connections for the EV tariff. This is bizarre, and this will be a most, I would say, inhibitive factor for adoption of electric vehicles, because you don't have the electricity grid and you are putting 3 lakh charger cost and 3 lakhs electricity cost, which operator in Delhi will not be putting up, because BSES has such a fantastic network. So I think that is where we should probably target as a country. Then probably the V1G and V2G can probably take off. Yeah, over to Vish.
Thank you. In fact, of this, just a quick point that I guess that no discussion on power sector is ever complete without a passing reference to distribution reforms. So you're that way you're bang on target. So over to you, Vish.
Yeah, I think Avdesh, you did a pretty good job summing up some of the challenges on the infrastructure side. I think the way I look, when I think about a charger, I actually have to think about who the customer is, right? So because there's residential charging, there's commercial, industrial, workplace charging as they're called. Then there's fleet charging, these bus depots or a depot style for EE taxis or electric taxis. There are different type of customers, and there's also public charging now. So the point is, nobody in the right mind, if you like, I don't see how anybody who's driving to a public charging station will say, okay, yeah, do my charging right now because you'll pay me 10 rupees more. Like, I don't see how that would work. Where this concept would really take off is on the residential side, perhaps on the commercial side, because their exposure towards demand charges, peak demand charges, and things of that nature. I struggle to see the value unless unless there is the reverse of what I was just talking about, is you create happy hours for people to go charge when they're driving. And if you see a happy hour alert on your car, you say, I'm going to take off and start charging early because I can save some money. I don't see how somebody could basically give away their flexibility when they're charging on a freeway or on a highway. So going back to this really means when discoms, when these players are trying to engage and trying to register these assets into V1G, V2G, or grid services, if you generally call it, you have to understand how you'll engage with that customer base. It's just the same way you think about voting. If you want to get a voter bank of a certain kind, you need to go figure out how you'll address and position it to that particular user base. So I think from a regulatory point of view, I think Abhishek and I spent a lot of time on one particular area, and that is, they've actually, in their classic example, they've built a CMS system with like 4 or 5 EV chargers. That works fine. It does the job of charging these 4 or 5 chargers. But their concern is there will be 10 other players in the market who will do the same thing. As a discom, how am I going to percolate my grid service signals down to all of these 10 different players? What role do I play? What infrastructure do I have to put in place? And how will I integrate with these systems? Because I not only need to send signals, but I also need to get data back from these assets so I can get a complete network level visibility of what's happening. So their struggle is not really on on the market side at the moment. The struggle is how do we create an infrastructure that will allow us to send these signals. In most of the drawings or the business model slides that we saw earlier, there are always dotted lines to the discom. What are those? What do these dotted lines actually mean in real life? There are APIs. Are these signals? Are what exactly are these? Is this carbon emissions data? So those are the things that still have to be figured out, I think. Abhishek, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I was going to ask Abhishek to give a very quick response, but very quick, please, Abhishek, because you are part and parcel, very.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Vish, for bringing that in. Obviously, there has to be a sanity and interoperability the way, because we know this is a democratic domain. We'll have multiple players, multiple CPOs, multiple protocols which will be in place. So there has to be standardization wherein the language spoken by the different chargers or the different charging point operators is being understood by what DERMS, or the Central Distributed Energy Resource Management System, which is one system in a particular DSO, should be there. So we talked about also about the OpenADR protocol, which could be the standard, which is already the standard, for example, in United States or Europe, which could be adopted here in the country as well. So that solves a lot of problem from the perspective of a grid management. So the grid management, as we know, is both active grid management and the passive grid management. So the system you talked about is for our own captive chargers and few of the chargers which we have installed or we are installing or something. There could be multiple others. For example, ESL is doing it. There could be several other parties which could be establishing these chargers, and they are free to do so, provided they are adhering to a particular single protocol of communication between the EVAC and the grid. That is one part. Second part, then the final part is also the convenience to the consumer. Each one of these CPOs or the different service providers will have their own customer app. This is the another aspect of scope of things which we are working with the government of Delhi as well. Why don't we have a Pan-Delhi single app which is provided to the consumers, maybe by the government itself, and everybody through interoperability, maybe everybody will have his own app, and that can talk through APIs to the single app, so that the consumer doesn't have to install 5 or 6 or 10 different apps on the mobile, depending upon which area of Delhi he is in to book and prepay and see the status charge, etc. Here I'll take applause, Mr. Praveer. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Abhishek. And I was also expecting that you would also flag the challenges we face in installing smart grids, getting the CapEx approved, and realizing the tariff impact, which also has an influence on consumer behavior. that's of course a wider subject. Now, back to you, Nishant. As the fleet operator, you will always come last, and you would also have the last laugh. Okay. A couple of quick questions. One is, what would you think the readiness of OEMs? You did touch on that. Vish also had spoken about it. The readiness of OEMs in accepting V2G as an ongoing technology, and you are investing in R&D. Now, if I can do a little bit of crystal ball gazing, if V2G is too transparent, when do you think vehicles should be made available for charging and discharging? Where do you think vehicles should reside at the time of discharging? And thirdly, and there's something again Vish had talked about, how do you see customer and driver behavior oriented under such a system, considering that the diversity and segmentation of customers would vary from individual owners to those who are driving, taxis and hired cars, and also the bus and truck drivers. How do I get all these customer segments, respond to managed charging, which obviously will have an impact on how the grid behaves? Over to you, Nishant.
Thank you, sir. So in terms of the OEM, I believe OEMs have stepped up in terms of bringing out new cars now, higher range cars on CCS protocols also. So if I was to name a few, like Nexon has been made available now, but now Tata has not taken a call yet to give it to a fleet operator, because a taxi brand and a personal vehicle, what happened to Tata Indica, they would not want to have that same thing to Tata Nexon. So we are still in talks with them. We are in talk with the country's biggest auto major also, where we gave, and this R&D has been happening from last 1.5 years in terms of charging, in terms of the battery cycles, and probably, on CCS protocol, there could be a car which could have about 7,000, 8,000 cycles also, which could last up to 8 years. And, all the OEMs are working on it. And not only on high-end cars, but mass market cars. Now, when we come to driver behavior, let us see what we do right now. We are into corporate mobility, all the corporates, and we have planned scheduled trips and things like that. So when we do a planned trip for our corporates, for their employee commute, it is easier for us to plan the car charging times and discharging times also, because it syncs with their duty times and all those things. So it's fairly relatively easier. Now we are also partner with Uber, Pan India. And when we talk about driver come owner model, they also, all the driver come owner models are also very smart when they know when there are peak demand hours like morning and evening, and when there are non-peak hours. So it's just a matter of, I think, knowledge sharing with them. When there is off peak after 11 o'clock till 3 o'clock, 4 hours are there. They would either go for charging or break time, or if they have excess capacity, they can go and discharge. So for driver come owner model, if there is a price differential in terms of times of day, and there's a substantial price difference, I think driver come owner will definitely charge their vehicles only in those times when they are, the tariffs are very less. And in terms of V2G, probably they can discharge their vehicles, because in a fleet operation, we do not give out cars to our fleet driver partners to take home. There are stationed at our hub. But when the driver come owner model in, let's say, 1 year or 2 years time is going to progress, they're going to take their cars at their home, residential, or wherever they have made arrangements. So that's from the driver side. When you talk about freight, so intracity LCV or SCV, when we talk about, as of now, I do not know of any LCV which is available in fast charging. All of them are into small, slow charging, with their city restrictions, no entry limits, in place in all the cities. All the EVs are not exempted. So there, I think the battery capacity is very less. In terms of trucking, yes, the battery packs have to be heavier battery packs, but again, as Avdesh highlighted, kindly understand that if I take a Nexon today, and if I have to set up a 50 kilowatt charger for a CCS charger, right? Most of the states run out of their LT threshold installing one charger only. So if I was to run a fleet of, let's say, 10 Nexon or 100 Nexons at one side, how much grid capacity I'm going to require? MG Motors or Hyundai Kona, all these have CCS or CHAdeMO. They have to be 25 or 50 kilowatt chargers. So even if so let's say in Telangana, I think the LT threshold is at 56 kilowatt. I cannot run a fleet if I set up one hub with only one charger, right? So these are the challenges. I think in terms of policy advocacy, I would like to submit that as EV tariff, there is a special EV tariff for every state. I think the LT thresholds for the downstream connection capex also should be increased for EVs only. Abhishek has been very helpful. In Delhi, we have done more, 100, 150 kilowatts, but other states should follow the same. Thank you, sir. Over to you. If I missed out, please tell me if I missed out anything.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Nishant. I think you have been quite on target. I think the time has now come to bring the discussions to a close. And as I had said before, all of you have been quite generous in putting forth your viewpoints and basically providing a roadmap. And the good thing about all the panelists I liked is that you have been very affirmative in seeing the challenges ahead and then trying to say that this could be the solutions. Now, before I conclude, would any of the panelists have one or two final words, but very quickly round the table? Otherwise, I'll bring this to a conclusion.
Sir, actually, Mr. Avadhut has to go to a meeting. He has a meeting at 1. If you can allow Mr. Avadhut to.
Yes, sure. I think I'll request the panelists just to spend 1 minute among each of them, and we can start with Avadhut.
Okay. So, see, overall, I strongly believe in the EV story, and I strongly believe India is a country where EV would serve multi-purpose, both for the grid as well as for the as a consumer. But one, I think I would like the regulator to be more open in terms of making this EV charging completely a market dependent instead of trying to regulate it. So that is my point. That at no point of time it should be tried to be regulated in terms of that what should be the final service fee, what should be the load, what type of charger you will put in. Let the market decide it, and then this will flourish. Otherwise, this will get scattered. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rahul.
Yeah. So, Prabir, I think in your last comments, you brought in the aspect related to the consumer behavior. And that's something sometimes I think we forget in the discussion about technology and markets, because I think one of the things is we need to, as Nishan mentioned, some of the things like when they are as a fleet operator, as a consumer, they have a unique requirement in terms of how many chargers they may need, what loads they need. Similarly, I think when we are creating public charging infrastructure, we also need to look at the convenience of the customers, because unless we have these 50 kilowatt chargers which can charge vehicles in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you are looking at someone charging the vehicle for at least 2 hours or more, and they are not going to just come somewhere because they are saving 5 rupees. Someone who is spending 10 lakh or 12 lakh on a vehicle most likely is not going to change their decision just because there is a discount of 2 rupees on a charging tariff and other thing. But at the same time, if you build the right charging infrastructure at places where people may go for shopping or movies or other thing, again post-COVID world, then I think there is a better opportunity with these type of things will enable by putting in charger just as a utility substation. I'm just giving that as an example because it happened in a couple of cities where utilities were proactive and they put in charging infrastructure at the substations because there was space available. But it is very difficult for someone to just go and charge a vehicle and just look at the substation for 2 hours. I think some of us may love to do that, but not most of the drivers. So these are the type of aspects beyond just the technical and market information need also come in while planning the charging infrastructure.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I speak something, sir?
Well, yeah, sure.
Thank you. Just a quick closing remark. you talked about consumer behavior and what are we talking about, for example? So from a point of the distribution company, consumer is the center of everything. So what is going to be set up over there has to be at the convenience of the consumer. Point number one. Point number two, we have an opportunity in the electric vehicle where we provide mobility services and extension of the range at the convenience and on demand of the consumer at the place and location of his choice. Why? Because city is omnipresent. Point number three, how regulations and other factors can be tailor-made to cater to point number two. Point number four, we are working on that direction. In point number three, you will be hearing soon from the regulator in Delhi, at least. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I now bring this to a close, because I'll hand it over to Shyamashis. Our time limit is approaching. Just a quick word. First and foremost, I feel very enriched, by the way the discussions have taken place, and I do see a way forward. So that's the very positive aspect of the discussions that we could have in the last 1 hour or so. A few challenges also I thought I'll put before you. One is that we talked about the capacity of DISCOMs, and what is necessary is that, again, by way of enabling regulation, that distribution utilities will have to be prepared to procure flexibility services under DER aggregation, of which the battery management system will be one. Now, these flexibility services would have to be closer to real time. These will have to be of intraday in nature, so that there is really a service delivery based on technology, AI and ML, machine learning to be particular, so that we have more of dynamic controls and pricing. TOU, as Rahul and even Abhishek have flagged, is not the answer. We need dynamic pricing, and that will lead to critical peak pricing. So that's a different concept altogether, and I'm afraid the market is yet to evolve. In terms of ancillary services, we are still in the age of handling tertiary products. So these are not fast acting, these operate in minutes. So these are interstate generating stations which produce the services. So broadly, to make all this happen, the institutional capacities have to be more enriched, and this will apply to implementing agencies, the nodal agencies, both at the center and state level. And last but not the least, we need to have cross-sectoral policy coordination, so that as an industry, which will have different segments of EV on one side, the DERs as a package on another, and then we have the distribution utility. So we have to create that platform. And maybe, my take is, rather than have, yes, we should have aggregators, but rather than the DISCOM aggregating, we should have a separate function under distribution system operation, which can act as an independent market facilitator, aggregate and bundle the services, unbundle them as and when necessary, and then offer them in a package for grid services. With these few words, with your permission, and thank you panelists, for contributing so handsomely to the discussions, can I hand over the discussions to Shyamashis? What do you, Shyamashis?
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot to all the panelists. I would like to request Dr. Satish Kumar to say something, the vote of thanks, actually.
Hi, thanks Shyamashis, and thanks Prabirji and all the panelists. I think I was listening with, I think he rapt attention to all the, I think, excellent points and insights that such a knowledgeable, I think, panelist we had were making. And I think in a way, I think we had a perfect mix. Also want to acknowledge Shamashish's efforts because I think he worked hard to not only on the report, but I think in terms of working with many of you, and also I think preparing for this webinar. And last but not the least, I think Prabir Niyogi ji for I think he expertly moderating this panel, and I think he getting such I think great insights and opinions out of all the people who were on the panel, and also summarizing the session beautifully. So once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to our continuing engagement with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Satish.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Mr. Vivek M. Chandran is not available because of his sudden, meeting coming to his calendar actually. So he has kind of, he said that he's not able to join. So as we are closing this launch event on behalf of AEEE, I would like to thank Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation for supporting this entire research project and for their guidance. I would thank Mr. Prabir Niyogi and all the panelists for their time and for an enriching discussion. To be very honest, I have learned a lot from this discussion actually at a personal level. And at the end, I would like to add that this entire project, this entire journey has been a defining experience for me as a practitioner in this field. So I have a lot of takeaways from this entire experience. And as we sign out, do stay safe and healthy. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.